Welcome to the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we've got a lot to discuss for you. As I mentioned, I'm back from my vacation, and there has been a decent amount of news that's dropped over the past few weeks. So, want to break down the basketball news. There's not a ton, and then we're going to get into some football recruiting, which there has been an absolute boatload. There's still some on the horizon, but we'll talk about who's committed, who's potentially looking to commit very soon, and what to look out for that's going to be coming out in the coming weeks as it pertains to basketball and football. So if you are interested, please consider subscribing, and let's get right into the show. So we're going to start with basketball because, as I mentioned, there's not a ton to discuss, but there's a few bits of information that have been coming out over the last couple of weeks since my last episode. First off, if you have not subscribed to the Substack, I did drop the first episode or the first installment of the newcomer breakdowns. I broke down Houston Mallett. Next week we'll have Chris Youngblood, then Aiden Holloway and Cliff Amore, and then we'll get into the freshmen. So there will be a breakdown on all 8 newcomers coming to the team. So if you are interested, please stay tuned for that. Additionally, whenever we have the new assistant hire, my plan is to at least do a little bit of a breakdown on what that coach, what their background is, what they've done well, what Nate Oates is looking to have them bring to the table. So if you are interested in the basketball news, please consider subscribing over to the Substack. So the other information that's come out regarding basketball is there's been a few different things. So one of the bigger things is if you are not following Henry Barrera, that's Alabama's strength and conditioning coach, over on Instagram, you really should. He's been posting a bunch of updates as it pertains to the guys coming in, what their bodies are starting to look like. They've actually shaved some weight off of Cliff Amore. They're gaining some weight on Aiden Sherrill and some others. But they did update some of their official roster since the initial release. So the roster updates are Youngblood went from 218 to 223. Amore went from 240 to 250. Jaren's up 5 pounds to 215. Aiden Sherrill is up 15 pounds to 240, which is huge. There was a lot of discussion there on Aiden potentially needing some additional weight, so potentially being up 15 pounds already is absolutely massive. Darian Reed up to 220, and then Houston Mallett up to 200. So I think all of these are really, really big. If those numbers do come to fruition, as anybody that's aware or not aware, some of the official roster things can be a little skewed. Some heights are sometimes juiced. Some weights may not be fully accurate. But if those numbers are close to accurate, then I think that that's something that we really should be looking forward to, especially, Aiden potentially gaining 15 pounds, having an extra 20 pounds on Darian Reed, Mallett being at 200 pounds. I think those are things that are really, really good to see moving forward for this team. Another thing that was announced was the jersey numbers. I'm going to pop them up here on the screen. But the new jersey numbers are Philon's going to be a 0. Aiden Holloway is going to play the 2. Reitzel is going to be 3. Youngblood's going to be 8. Cliff Amore's 11. Aiden Sherrill's 22. Cunningham's 24. Reed's 35. And then Houston Mallett's 95. If 95 is very confusing to you, I will drop a little bit of the information on that. If you read the Substack already, you'll have already known this, but Mallett is 95 kind of on the basis that the thought that a lot of a basketball's player, 95% of their time is going to be played without the ball, and that's something that he really embraces. So the 95 kind of is just his reminder that, a lot of time you're not going to have the ball, and that's completely okay. So, don't be alarmed when you see the 95. There's a reason behind it. Another thing that's come out is there have been a couple of additional games announced. I know when we went through some non-conference schedules, I mentioned that there were going to be some other games coming out. A couple of the games that are coming out are UNC Asheville is going to be probably to open the season on the 4th of November. As well as North Carolina. I did another video about that on December the 4th. Then I mentioned the North Dakota game on the 18th, and then 2 of the other non-conference games are home against Kent State on the 22nd and home against South Dakota State on the 29th. Both of those are new additions, new announcements. I do believe that there's probably one more game left to be announced. I would suspect it's probably going to be another bye game, early in the season, in between that UNC Asheville and McNeese State game. But just a heads up, that's what we're looking at in terms of basketball. The other piece of information when it comes to basketball that I think is really, really important to note is some comments out of practice. Some people that I know that have, either been to practice or heard the players have said one of the more surprising guys coming in and out of practice has been Philon. That Philon is absolutely putting on a show, has looked really, really good in summer workouts, and that's, great to see. It's not super surprising from a guy that was scoring 35 a game out of Mobile, but, when the thought kind of coming into this is that Philon potentially would be the third, point guard. You've got Sears, then Aiden, then Philon. If he is that level of guard where he's going to kind of force you to play him, just the level of Nate Oates' offense and the kind of steps that allows you to take is absolutely massive. I think that's really, really big. There was also a comment by Aiden Holloway potentially about how good Cliff Amori was in regards to some other bigs that he's played against, which some Auburn fans did not love to hear. But either way, the information coming out of practice, everything we've heard has been really, really positive. Sounds like the guys are doing great, and I'm really excited for where this team is to come. So that's kind of the basketball news. There's, like I said, there's not a ton of news, really just as it relates to rosters, numbers coming out, and then a few additional schedule announcements. As additional stuff comes out, when assistant coach is announced, etc., just stay tuned. I will be putting out some additional episodes. I'm planning to probably do these every other week, just while the news is a little slow. And then as we get closer to season, I'll get back into the 1 to 2 a week, depending upon how games and schedules permit. So let's move to football, because there has been a lot of football news and it absolutely needs to be discussed. So we're going to start with who has already committed. So I'm going to pop up a graphic that On3 put out of blue chip guys that have committed since June 1st. So the graphic you'll see on screen is all guys, like I said, that have committed since June 1st. And the big part about this, and it's really important to note, is when Kalen DeBoer was hired, a lot was talked about as to how good his recruiting classes were at Washington. And they were not good, right? And the notion was that Kalen oftentimes won with the least superior team on the field, right? The other teams he was playing against, like when he played against Oregon, when he played in all of these games, he had the less talented team. When he played against Texas, he had a less talented team. But that he was a really, really good on-field coach. But when you come to a place like Alabama, the fan base demands excellence. They demand you to get those top-level recruits. You're not going to be, 20th in recruiting and survive at Alabama. So it was something that was mentioned as to, do you think he can recruit? And all the people that you heard coming out were like, I think he can absolutely recruit. The guy's a really, really personable person. He's really good to talk to. He comes across as very genuine in any conversations you've heard. And everything I had heard sounded really, really good. But it's like, at the end of the day, recruiting will speak for itself, and we'll see what happens. Well, he hit the ground running. Obviously he had to recruit his own roster. He had to get some guys back. He had to get other guys out of the transfer portal. You got guys like Caden Proctor to return. You've had plenty of internal guys that have been rumored to be leaving and then stayed or otherwise. And so, he's done a really, really good job with the roster. But now we're coming into this next recruiting cycle, which he was late getting into from an Alabama perspective, because some of the caliber of guys he wasn't even reaching out to at Washington. So it's not like he was moving from one school to another and just saying, hey, follow me from this school to this other school. I'm sure that had some to do. But some of these guys that he's going after now are not guys he would have gone after in Washington, partially due to location, partially due to quality of player, talent, roster makeup, just all together. And he's done a great job. So when we look at the guys that he's landed, there's been 8 blue chip guys that he's landed since June 1st. And there are a couple of other big names on the horizon with crystal balls out, as well as a couple just to keep an eye on where this could be an incredible class. So as of this moment, he got 5-star Dijon Lee here recently to commit to Alabama. Keelan Russell was a flip from SMU. Originally, it was like, oh, Alabama got to flip from SMU. He went on to win the Elite 11 a couple of weeks ago, so that's starting to look like a better and better pickup. Chuck McDonald, corner. Dawson Merritt, linebacker. Jackson Lloyd, tackle. DeBoer, lineman. Carroll, lineman. And then Caleb Edwards. And the Caleb Edwards is a fairly recent addition. He committed earlier today, actually. And so that's obviously a huge one. And then when you look at who else is on the horizon, Ackland Deer is a top running back who had been committed. Let's make sure I get this right. He's the number 2 quarterback per on 3 from Mississippi, 6 foot 210, had been committed to Ole Miss since March, and most of the recruiting rankings and sources are saying that he's flipping to Alabama. So that would be another 5-star guy coming on into the fold. Another name to watch out for is not committed, but have had a ton of predictions is Caleb Cunningham, currently the number 2 receiver in the country, 6'2", 180 currently. Decisions sometime in July is all that anybody's ever hearing. There's not been a date picked out as to when he's going to be committing, but Caleb Cunningham is another name that Alabama is very high on his list, and from what we heard coming out of his visit, Alabama probably is the decision. Like I said, there's been more predictions rolling in on that one. So it sounds like, Alabama, from a recruiting standpoint, especially in that receiver core and in the skill positions, has done an absolutely incredible job. 2 other names just to kind of keep an eye out on, and depending upon who you listen to, is how possible these guys are to come to Alabama. There is Kalik Lockett, who's currently the number 3 receiver per on 3. Some of the recruiting sites currently have Texas leading. I know that some other people really liked that Alabama did well Alabama did really, really well on his visit. So potentially Alabama is a dark horse, or not really a dark horse, but is somebody to watch in that one. Some places are thinking that Alabama will hold off Texas, but it really seems like it's probably going to be an Alabama versus Texas battle for Kalik Lockett. That's another 5-star guy. And then Derek Meadows, currently out of Bishop Gorman. He's the number 7 receiver in the country. On 3 currently has him predicted to go to Notre Dame. I will say he was on he's 6'6", 205. He was on the visit with, I forget who else. I believe he was on a visit with a couple of the other receivers that have just committed. I know Kalik Lockett was also on the visit with Edwards, the tight end that we just mentioned. So a lot of these guys, Alabama has just had some really, really big recruiting weekends and has been able to lock up, like I said, currently the number 2 class in the country going into July, which is just absolutely massive. And like I said, I still think that there are some guys out there that are yet to be committed, and I really think that Alabama holds a really, really good chance on these guys. Oh, correct. So I got it here. So Derek Meadows visited with Caleb Cunningham, Dijon Lee, that's already committed. There's a Ty Jackson, and a linebacker down to Alabama and Georgia for the most part. DeBoer, I already mentioned, he was a commit out of Viger. Just all these guys that have just done a really, really good job. And Kalik Lockett and Edwards, they visited together. Like I said, currently Kalik Lockett is predicted to go to Texas. Like I said, there are some places thinking that Alabama has a pretty good shot to get the flip, to get him to commit. Not a flip, but to get him to commit. And then additionally, let me see if I can pull it up here. There is another. Sorry. Either way, Alabama is just in for. There's another lineman I was trying to find. Well, right now I can't seem to pick out the lineman. I will pop his photo up here on the screen if I can get it to. If I can find it here after the recording. But either way, Alabama, just the big thing to note from a recruiting standpoint is at the end of the day, Nick Saban had built a recruiting machine. He had built a recruiting staff that was evaluating some of the best talent in the country. And then Saban and his coaching staff were able to lock down some of the best talent in the country. And what happened when DeBoer came in, he was able to keep Freddie Roach and was able to keep some of the defensive guys on. And then he was able to bring in a guy like Jamarcus Shepard, who, for all intents and purposes and everything that I've heard, is absolutely beloved by all the players. DeBoer also brought in a coaching style from everyone that I've heard that players just absolutely love. This is a much more player-led team than Saban had. Not to say that Saban's teams weren't player-led. There were advisory councils and a few other things. But at the end of the day, from everything we're hearing, that the players are having a huge factor in this. The players are in on a lot of these recruiting visits. A lot of your recruits are doing a lot of the recruiting for you. Like, for example, your quarterback is doing a huge percentage of your recruiting currently to get people to, like, Keelan Russell is doing a lot of recruiting to get some of the best receivers in the country. And when you have a guy that wins the Elite 11 and has the respect not only of the people around him, but obviously the people that could potentially be coming in for him and playing with him, that's huge, right? That gets into your Tuas with Jerry Jeudy and, that group, right? The group that comes in and beats Georgia in the second half of that national championship game when they brought in the freshmen because Tua had come in with them. That's those kinds of guys, right? That's what you get when you have a quarterback and a receiving group, A, that's that talented, and B, that is kind of bonded together because they want to play for each other and want to play for that coach. And I think Jamarcus Shepard has done a great job with that. I think that he is a huge piece of why that's doing so well, but I think that you can't understate how good of a job DeBoer has done since getting to Alabama. I think that he has done an absolutely fantastic job, and and it has just done an incredible job. Oh, got it here. So the lineman that I was mentioning to keep an eye out on is Ty Haywood. There have been quite a few guys that have, let's make sure so I don't get this wrong, Wilt Fong and Chad Simmons, two of the directors of recruiting for On3, have him predicted to go to Alabama currently. He's currently the number 2 rated tackle in the country and number 9 overall prospects. There's another 5-star guy that is, like I said, a not lock, but it's really, really looking like DeBoer is going to be able to close it out. And like I said, currently Alabama is boasting the number 2 rated class, and I think that a top 3 class is looking almost guaranteed. And at the end of the day, from everything that I've witnessed from an on-field perspective with Kalen DeBoer, if he can boast a top 5 class, he's going to have the guys that's needed to be able to compete at the highest level. He's that good of an on-field coach. When you look at what he's done at Washington and what he's done the other places he's coached with the lower, in theory, skill talent, having the depth and the ability of the guys at Alabama with those top-level recruiting classes, I think is going to be absolutely massive. Another thing I want to mention about Kalen DeBoer, and this is something that may be surprising to some people, and I tweeted it out a couple of days ago, but it's not something that I remember hearing at all, but I heard it mentioned on a podcast, and I want to, let me pull up my tweet so that I make sure I give credit to the correct podcast that DeBoer was on. So he was on Next Up with Adam Brenneman, and he was being interviewed kind of about the transition from Washington over to Alabama and talking about, some things he had implemented. And one of the things he talked about implementing was that they're going to be moving to morning practices. And the reason I just bring this up is, for those of you that are unaware, I was in communications. I was a sports PR major at Alabama, so I had quite a few classes with athletes. Jalen Hurts was in quite a few of my classes. Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, Mac Jones. It was not uncommon for me to see athletes in my classes, especially if I had a morning class. And it was always known that, like, if not if you wanted, but if there was going to be an athlete in your class, especially a football player, it was going to have to be a morning class, because after about noon, they would go get lunch and then they would have practice. And so they would have practice and they would have team meetings and workouts and all these, they had workouts in the mornings, but they would have all these things going on, right? And so it was just very well known that if a football player was going to be in your class, you had to have that class in the morning. So I think it's very unique that DeBoer is going to morning practices. I think that in the Alabama heat, I think that that's potentially going to do very well because obviously they have the conditioning staff that's going to have the guys conditioned. I think that having morning practices potentially is going to be something that the guys are really going to enjoy because for anybody that has never lived in Alabama or never lived in the South with this level of humidity, the afternoons in the South in that 100-degree heat is absolutely a nightmare. So I think that morning practices is something that the guys are really going to enjoy. And another thing that I heard, and so this is a comment that I was speaking to, actually a former high school teacher of mine. He's a football coach and has gone to many of the Saban camps, as well as he went to DeBoer's camp this year. He said that he felt like some of the staff and some of the people around the program were just a little lighter. And he said he kind of attributed it to in Saban's camps and the way that Saban was, some coaches and just people around the program were a little on edge, worried that if they did something wrong, Saban may snap and scream at you or berate you or whatever because of the excellence he demanded. And it just felt like, not to say DeBoer doesn't demand excellence, because that's not at all what it is, but that his style of reprimanding people or getting the best out of his people is obviously much different than Saban's. That's been well documented, about his not wanting to cuss, not to say that he can't or doesn't, but, not trying to have that be his go-to, not trying to just lose his cool. That's something that's kind of been well documented. And from my understanding and what I heard from the person that I spoke to, it sounded like DeBoer, almost just has a lightness that his staff and the people around the program are feeling as it relates to how he is coaching and how he is doing everything. And so that's trickling down even to his high school camps, to, just the people around the program. And so my gut says, that's a big reason why somebody like a Caden Proctor potentially comes back. You have these guys where potentially some guys that maybe didn't love the way that Saban coached. Obviously, you love the result, but maybe you don't like the means to get to the end. I think that DeBoer is coming about it in a little bit different way. I know there was a comment by one of the linemen saying, I actually follow DeBoer on Snapchat. It's the first time I've ever had a coach on Snapchat. It's just, DeBoer's on Twitter. It's not to say that he's somebody that's going to be super active in all these things, but it really feels like DeBoer is, a new age coach and is somebody that is really connecting with his players. And from everything that we're hearing coming out of practice and obviously the recruiting that we started, and we're talking about in this episode, it seems to be coming to fruition and seems to be doing really, really well. So that's what I wanted to talk about when it comes to a football perspective. My plan is to, once everything is done, I probably will potentially see if I can get a guest to come on and talk about the recruiting class, who they really, really like. Admittedly, as you probably have noticed, I do, some level of research when it comes to recruiting, but I am not the recruiting person, especially when it comes to football. There's just so many guys. The way the football classes work, I'm just not somebody that's super engaged and super involved when it comes into that. So I would be interested in seeing, I'm going to reach out to a couple of people and see if I can have somebody come on and discuss that with me and talk about who they think some of their top people are in this class and who they're maybe even looking forward to the class to come. And then I'll also plan to do a little bit of a what to look forward to for this upcoming season as it pertains to potential, rough ideas of starting lineups, rough ideas of, who's going to be trotting out there in game one. So if you are interested in that, please like and subscribe. Like I said, that information is going to be coming out here on YouTube. And I also, after I get done with the basketball write-ups, my plan is to, finish. I'm going to kind of work on the basketball write-ups and just have them all scheduled out. And then I'm going to work on some football write-ups and get those scheduled out as well. Maybe some, if nothing else, some like position group kind of breakdowns of, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and, some key takeaways for these groups. So if you are interested, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel here or over on Substack. I do really appreciate all of the support. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening, watching, and subscribing. And if you are interested, please stay tuned for the next one. Peace.